Hello and welcome. What we're going to be looking at in this video is we're going to be looking at breaking down and interpreting Margaret Edson's wit. And in this video what we're going to be looking at is just a couple of themes and ideas which are central to the play. So let's just get straight into it. The themes and ideas of wit are reflective of one which is a modern text and of a very deep protagonist. Now what that means is essentially obviously it's a very modern work in the sense that it is set in the modern day, that the protagonist is a modern woman. But it's also quite deep in the sense that, yes, she is somewhat archetypal, but she's also quite deep in the way that she thinks and the way that she feels, and certainly in the way that the play is composed, and certainly her interactions with the audience reflect someone who is quite deep and quite complex. And so this play, through her, I guess, her condition, and certainly through the idea of death, which is hinted at and certainly referred to quite a bit throughout the play, in order to discover really what makes her quite deep. This video will also explore many traits of her character, and we'll go through not only her character but others as well, which reflect, I guess, these ideas of basically a modern text and also the protagonist's own sense of what it is essentially not only right and wrong, but also the way of looking at the world. Okay, let's start with intellect, as this is quite a key idea of the play, and certainly one which is I guess, mentioned a fair bit. So looking at life as something to be studied is something that's quite predominant in wit, and certainly we see that through a number of the characters, and certainly through the fact that her treatment is part of a research study, but also in her own way of looking at the world as something to be studied, and certainly of language. Then we sort of see, I guess, almost the pros and cons of intellect, in that we get the pros in that it finds really fascinating things, and certainly in terms of her condition, it is her intellect which keeps her strong. It is the fact that she constantly tries to stimulate herself intellectually that drives her through each day. And yet the cons, of course, are the ones which, I guess, find emotionless and almost baselessness in some of the intellectual things that she does. For instance, if you're looking at the idea of her studying medical terms, which are to do with her condition, they may be something which keep her alive and certainly are very beneficial to her in that regard. However, they're quite baseless in the sense that she doesn't really know why she's studying them. It's just to basically keep her going for each day. And certainly it's almost that study of language for the sake of it, which you sort of see it, I guess some of the drawbacks of intellectualism is that everything is studied in such a way that you almost after a while forget why you're studying it. Certainly in the case of the cancer treatment, again, there is a little bit of an impersonality to it. And through this, I guess we sort of see a side of medical research, which is not about the patient, who is, I guess, what all medical research is for, and more about the actual way that it works, the way that diseases work and their effects on people. The title for one actually reflects a small little intellectual argument, which is symbolic of her life. So if you see the wit semicolon, what that is referring to a semicolon at the end of Death Be Not Proud and John Donne, which she has an argument with Professor Ashford about in terms of its interpretation. And certainly she argues at the time that it was, I guess, death being conquered, whereas Ashford's interpretation is more along the lines of, and I guess the erroneous interpretation one way or the other, depending on how you look at it, is one which is saying that it's only a small, short breath. It's not a full stop life. Life is but just a very short transition onto death, and it's quite symbolic that way. So even that small little intellectual sort of piece is one of the parts of the story which is not only quite important to, I guess, the way that the play is constructed, but also sort of reflects a number of small little ideas and arguments which are present throughout. Intellect is a weakness, and as I said before, it can be seen as pros and cons, and certainly in terms of a weakness, it's exposed and it's reflected quite readily by the doctors, and certainly their weakness in treating their patients. And the idea, I guess, that the treatment was what was killing her as well. And there was that line from the play where she sort of admitted as much. And one couldn't help but or think, or even possibly interpret that as being something on the part of the doctors, in terms of the fact that they are, I guess, a little bit uncaring about the way about her condition, about the way that she is, and more focused on the actual research, the end result. However, as I said before, it is also quite a strength of hers, and certainly her intellect is not something that she's ashamed of, nor should she be ashamed of. It's something that allows her to cope, it allows her to learn more about her condition. Even if it is considered somewhat baseless, it is something which does drive her to live each day, and it is something which continues to provide a challenge for her. I think the last thing that she wants, is, I guess anyone would if they are bedridden, is to feel useless and is to feel incompetent of any sort of task. And so by continuing to flex her intellectual muscle, she's starting to feel that she is, I guess, still on top of things and still has some strength left, something still left to offer the world. Insight is one thing that competes with intellect, and it's only through, I guess, her failing health that allows Bearing's character to learn the value of life. And this is, again, another predominant idea in the play to be looking for. And it's represented, I guess, through a number of aspects. First of all is that the fact that she knows little about death, even though she spent her entire life studying poems about it. And that even learning death through done is not necessarily a good way to, I guess, learn how to pass from one world into the next. And that her study of, I guess, the language of death, and certainly the ideas and the romantic ideas of death, is little consolation when it comes to actually time for facing her own death. And certainly the ideas in Death Be Not Proud, for instance, ones which are hard to relate to as the play goes on. So certainly at the beginning she feels like she relates to death a lot, whereas towards the end she really does realize how little it does relate to her. She also learns kindness, and this and instead this basically allows her to find happiness in her own way, in her own accord. The casual line, for instance, "How are you feeling today?" which is repeated at intervals throughout the play. It reveals to Bearing that meaningful words can be baseless and hollow. And certainly, this is something that she spends her entire life trying to find meaning in. So if you're looking at language and trying to find meaning and then find words that are hollow and baseless, she sort of starts to find other things which are more valuable. And certainly the warmth and compassion she feels with Susie, including where she shares the icebox or the popsicles, the fact that she calls her sweetheart when no one is allowed to call her sweetheart, those sorts of things. They are ones which sort of actually fill her life with a lot more of meaning than the language which previously filled that hole. Human spirit. Now, the human spirit is an idea, I guess, which almost comes naturally to a play about someone surviving cancer, and certainly someone who is dying of cancer. And it is a driving force of the character, and certainly represented through the title of wit, as in wit is what I guess allows her to keep living each day, is the fact that she can continue to sprout these one-liners and make these really almost sarcastic remarks at times. It's almost a reason for her to live. However, it's also, I guess, a way to show that she is not being beaten by the disease, and certainly one way to show that she has still strength. Her exploration of language and desire to learn even more medical jargon, as I mentioned before, motivates her to endure her sickness. And certainly we see the human side of the struggle, but also we see a little bit more of her symbolic side, and that it is, I guess, she sticks to her strength, sticks to what she knows. Those things are important. The dialogue with the audience allows also a personal connection with this endurance, and certainly when you're looking at the idea of the human spirit, then you are essentially seeing this idea of how she is able to survive it in a more personal sort of way. If we're looking at it literally from behind the fourth wall, as we often do in plays, then what happens is we don't really get a connection with it. We don't really interact with it. We're sort of like we're a camera perched on the top railing. through her interaction with the audience, it suddenly becomes a lot more real, and certainly her connection with us as an audience, and even reading the play, our connection, I guess, with us as a reader, allows us to dig deeper into her psyche, and certainly to understand her own ideas a lot more. Let's look at death as well. Now, death is an idea which obviously, again, from a play about death, is quite heavily explored, and is not only explored through the content, but through its connection to Donne's poetry, which is frequently referenced. The title Semicolon, as I mentioned before, is based on a misrepresentation of the last line in Death Be Not Proud. As in that line, and death shall be no more, death thou shalt die. Which is basically to sort of say that through that semicolon one could interpret it a number of different ways. First of all, that it's almost like a grand remark of you shall die, and the other part is that it's only a very brief interruption. It's sort of a not quite a full stop, just a mild pause, which sort of almost emphasizes that there is a gap which is bridged between life and death, and one which will allow eternal life, and certainly one which will allow people to continue to thrive in an afterlife and to have some hope to keep on living, something that they can live for. Also relates to the passage of death and to that transition, as I mentioned. So that idea that the passage to death is almost seamless, that it's only a very brief interruption, that it is like like I said, a semicolon. Moving on. Let's look at the idea of loneliness. Now, loneliness is quite evident throughout the play, and certainly Bearing's loneliness, and that she does feel quite lonely. And before, I guess, when she had language and words, she really didn't really care for friends, and certainly as someone who was a bit of a loner, she didn't really value having others in her life. It's only upon her deathbed when, I guess, the feeling that she wanted someone to love for her, to care for her, while she is dying, that she starts to really feel that. I mean, she's unmarried, she has no kids, her parents are both deceased, and she has no close friends. And it leads to a very lonely sort of existence. And I think it sort of preys on a lot of people's fears that they're going to die alone, that there's not going to be anyone to cry for them once they're gone. And certainly, I guess we get that sort of sensation about Bearing's character, and that you almost feel like there is no one to care for her, to really to care that she's gone. And certainly, that's one of the things that I guess really comes out. And certainly, one of those ideas that sort of is really sort of marred by her intellectualism, that she sort of feels that through her constant study of language and through driving people away, that she doesn't feel that connection with others, and certainly she wishes that she did. And it is obsession with her study of language which shows one of the negative aspects of her wit, and that has denied her a life outside of what she knows, her intellect, her ideas, her intelligence. And certainly, I guess, shows a bit of a weakness about her, but also the fact that she is still I guess, ready to accept that as a flaw and take advantage of it just before she does pass away is one thing that shows her change and certainly shows her evolution as a character. But anyway, those are the key ideas of, and certainly main ideas and themes of the play Wit. So if you're looking at some things to start discussing, and certainly this is where you would now think about where you use these ideas, and certainly how these ideas are going to be relevant to expanding your discussion on it. So think about it this way. These things and these ideas, this contrast, I guess, between intellect and compassion is one which you should be looking to explore with some sort of depth. But also just have a look at the ideas and sort of have a look over what meaning they have, and certainly how you're able to analyze them and how you're able to evaluate them using the language and the style of the play itself. But otherwise, that's about it for the main ideas and themes of Wit. Until next time, I'll see you later.